It's not uncommon to experience doubt in your faith at some point in your life. In fact, it's an experience that a lot of Muslims can relate to. But why does it happen? What are the things that can cause Muslims to doubt Islam to the point that they no longer identify as being Muslims? And what can we do about them? Welcome to DoubleTake, a podcast by Yaqeen Institute about the questions and ideas around Islam and Muslims that give us pause. Remember to subscribe to the show on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. I'm Mohamad Zaoud, and today on the show, we're exploring why Muslims experience religious doubt. You may have a friend or a child going through some serious religious doubt, or you yourself may be going through a cycle of doubt. So with me is Dr. Youssef Chouhoud, who's done proper quantitative research on the topic and published his findings in the Yaqeen Institute paper, What Causes Muslims to Doubt Islam? A Quantitative Analysis. Dr. Chouhoud, welcome to DoubleTake and Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Chouhoud, you're an assistant professor of political science at Christopher Newport University. You've got a PhD and master's in political science, and you've done a fairly diligent job on the topic of religious doubt within Muslims. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
As Muslims, we aim to be certain in our faith and to build yaqeen, pardon the pun. Certainly, it's about building certainty in our faith. But of course, we're human. So it's natural to have questions and doubts, and we're in the process of learning. I want to know, what are the causes of these doubts? But before we get into that, can you help me just quantify or qualify what is religious doubt? What's that point of religious doubt that you went out and looked for?
Sure. Yeah, that's always a great place to begin. It's where I think we fail to really appreciate how much we take certain things for granted in terms of our understanding of a term versus somebody else's understanding of a term. And so it's really important to kind of lay the foundation before we get too deep into the conversation. And, as you can imagine, the notion of religious doubt can take on, a number of different forms. And so for this initial study, where we would basically just trying to create a baseline understanding of religious doubt. Our conception of religious doubt was that kind of doubt that really takes you to the cusp of leaving Islam, to where you're really just kind of shaken in your iman, and it really, you're not really too sure what the road has ahead for you, and so that's the conception that we settled on. Certainly, there are different conceptions of doubt that you can go ahead and study. There's a version of doubt where it's actually kind of encouraged in a way in Islam, in that a doubt that's more akin to, say, curiosity, right? Where Islam doesn't kind of shy away from questions and from kind of seeking knowledge, obviously. But there are so the doubt that we wanted to focus on initially, if for no other reason than the fact that it's a bit easier to really kind of wrap your head around and ultimately quantify, is this kind of extreme form of doubt where it really is that you're kind of on the precipice of perhaps kind of leaving the faith. So what really kind of pushes you that far? That's what we sought to get a handle on with the initial qualitative study, where we asked imams and community leaders what their experiences are, and then ultimately the follow-up quantitative study that you mentioned.
So it's so there's no doubt, if you don't mind. So the way we're defining religious doubt for the purpose of this podcast and for your research is, it's not the general curiosity that someone has. It's what basically pushes people over the edge or takes them to the edge. And that edge is the edge of their identifying as Muslims or practicing Islam. Is that correct?
Yes, no, that's absolutely correct. And even, even in that definition, which I would say, was spot on. I mean, even there, you can kind of, kind of poke holes a little bit, right? I mean, the notion of identifying as a Muslim. I mean, do you need to, kind of identify, kind of consciously as a Muslim in order to, kind of this is to say that the conversation that we're having today is, has a very kind of defined scope, but there is a whole ocean information that we still have yet to plume, and I think that's kind of important to just kind of put on the table right at the beginning.
Yeah, fair enough. In preparation for this podcast and just following your works, you have a serious frustration with the way people talk about doubts and the way people generally in Muslim communities. So before we even go through the doubts that you looked into and the sources of doubts, I'd like to ask you a question, and which is, what are those areas around religious doubt in our Muslim communities that you feel is so problematic? Like, what is it that frustrates you about us discussing religious doubts?
So I guess I could best answer this in kind of a general sense. I think what frustrates me a lot about the discourse that takes place within our community, really writ large, is that there's simply too much confidence in the way that certain leaders believe that they kind of understand the community and what is kind of going on in the community, and that confidence is not born out of much in the way of really kind of systematic engagement with the issue or with the experiences of the community. It's just an educated hunch, right? An informed opinion in the sense that they are perhaps a knowledgeable person, but really
immersed. They're immersed in the community, but a certain part of the community, like they're interacting with just their followers, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, basically, what it comes down to is, I guess the best way to kind of get this across is to talk to you a little bit, if I can kind of go off on a quick tangent about why exactly I became a social scientist. And the reason why I became a social scientist is in part, but in no small part, due to the fact that, I would, kind of go to Jum'ahs, I would go to these halakas, and invariably, almost, right, there would be a point where somebody standing on the minbar would say something with such confidence that I knew to be far more complicated than they are presenting it, or just flat out wrong, and not with regards to Islam.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're not talking about them quoting a hadith or a verse from the Quran,
No.
being confident about that. It's about their analysis of the Muslim community, right?
Absolutely, yes. So their analysis, their interpretation of the social aspect, right, of being a Muslim in America, or the political aspect of being a Muslim in America, right? Because you have expertise in the religious aspect of how to be a Muslim does not necessarily translate into those other spheres. Certainly, you can inform those other spheres and inform our understanding of those other spheres, but you are not, just by dint of having a degree from Al-Azhar, a political scientist, right? That you understand kind of the complexities of American Muslims. That's just not how it works. And so it was very clear to me that there was a lot of that going on, and I would always it would just kind of irk me. And so what I try to do is I try to be very kind of systematic in the way I approach an issue. I try to be very qualified, and for better or worse, you're going to hear a whole lot of qualification on my part throughout the next few minutes. because I know that the deeper I get into an issue, the more humility I have with how much I actually know. Because there's just you come up to a body of water and you think it's like a puddle, and you realize it's an ocean. And so this is how I think we should approach our understanding of these very kind of complex and complicated issues. And a lot of times what happens instead is that we get offered these very neat narratives, very just so stories about this is why the youth is going astray, without really kind of interrogating. Yes, that could be part of what's going on, but that could actually be causing harm. That kind of very very well packaged explanation about what's going on. Because a lot of times what really we need to pay attention to is kind of the nuances, right? The kind of the gradations of our community, right? We are the most diverse religious community, right, in terms of racial and ethnic background, and how we believe that diversity just kind of falls by the wayside when we give these kind of blanket prescriptions about what's going on with American Muslims is just beyond me, right? So we need to be kind of cognizant of that diversity, of that complexity, when we speak about these issues, including religious doubt.
And the risk, I guess, of those blanket statements being misinterpreted is even worse when your khutbah or your sermon is recorded and people are listening from very different contexts. Like someone listening to a recording from Dallas about specific issues related to the Muslims in Dallas, and they're listening to it from the UK or from East Africa or wherever, right? So
absolutely, context matters. Absolutely.
So I haven't done the research that you did, but I'm going to throw a few statements, right, as to what I think, or I've heard leads Muslims to the edge, right? And the way I'm going to pose these statements, I want you to kind of qualify them or assess them. So I'm going to do it in a little bit of a different way. We had a prime minister in Australia a couple of years ago, and she was standing, Julia Gillard. She was at a press conference, and she was asked a question point blank, and her answer was, "I'm not saying it's everything. I'm not saying it's nothing. I'm saying it's something." Okay, it was a true, good political answer.
Yes.
And so that's the spectrum I'd like to use today, if that's okay, Dr.
No,
Chouhoud.
absolutely. Yeah.
Tell me,
I just told you I love qualification. Yeah, so this is perfect. Yeah.
So I'm gonna say a few statements, either that I think lead Muslims to the edge, or that I've heard people say that's what's leading Muslims to doubt their faith and therefore either leave Islam or just not practice. And then after we do this exercise, I want to hear from you in comparison to that. What were your findings with the proper study? So I'm gonna start off with Muslims doubt their faith, or they stop practicing because they just want to fit in and get approval from mainstream society and non-Muslims.
It's not nothing, but I would say it becomes closer to something if you are of a certain age, right? I mean, because listen, one of the things that similarly kind of irks me about anybody trying to analyze American Muslims is that they think that they are this kind of unique community that isn't kind of susceptible to the social forces that act upon everybody else in society. And so, listen, we are going to be teenagers at some point, and teenagers are very kind of angsty, very insecure, and that's just the nature of being a teenager regardless of where you are. And so, yeah, so perhaps, this notion of fitting in and everything, it acts upon you perhaps a bit more, right? When you're in those kind of formative, adolescent, kind of late teen years. But perhaps I think it is less of a consideration once you become kind of more confident in yourself, like everybody does, right? Once you kind of hit your 20s, hit your 30s.
Sure. So it's a maybe a something, right? Maybe a something.
Yeah, yeah, maybe it's something.
Okay. Um, so Muslims leave Islam because they're too lazy to learn about their religion.
Oh, that's nothing. That's nothing. It's not that they're too lazy to learn. Perhaps they are too lazy to learn your particular interpretation, or they are too lazy to learn in the way that you think is the way to learn about Islam. But you got to meet people where they are, right? You can't just you got to, to put it differently, you got to know your audience. If I was going to give a talk at a masjid, I'm not going to start, kind of quoting political scientists and citing esoteric research from the early 1920s. No, I'm gonna talk to them like a person, right? So if you're gonna if you think somebody's being lazy, perhaps you're being a little too lazy, and not thinking of a different way to reach them.
So another reason some people think that Muslims doubt their religion is that they're just not practicing enough. They're not praying enough. They're not reading enough Quran.
That is something from one perspective and everything from another perspective, I would say. Uh, because I mean, one of the things that I always want to try to make clear when I talk about these issues is that I study Muslims. I do not study Islam, right? So everything that I am saying is just a reflection of what the data is telling me about the lived experiences of American Muslims. I don't make any normative judgments on what Islam says or anything along those lines. So what we do know, right, from basic teachings of Islam is that yes, the more you practice, the closer you get to Allah, the perhaps easier your road will be then, to perhaps accept the faith. Obviously, at the end of the day, everything comes to hidayah, and hidayah is from Allah, right? So that is so from that perspective, it's everything. Putting solely my social scientist hat on, I think it's something, but I really qualified something in that there's no way that I can really kind of pinpoint, right, a particular act, a particular behavior having an impact on one's belief, absent all the other behaviors, right? Because I'm not gonna, put an experiment and say, listen, I don't want you to fast, I don't want you to make salawat, just kind of pray Fajr and let's see how that works, and then we'll have you pray Fajr and pray Dhuhr, and then we'll see, if you improve, right? I can't do that, right? And so absent that, if somebody is praying, they're probably doing some other things, and so it's really hard to disentangle what's going on there.
Okay, last one before we get to the actual results, right? Muslims feel, or those who doubt Islam within the Muslims, and those who are on the edge and want to leave Islam or don't practice, just feel like Islam is irrelevant to their lives, and that they feel that Islam needs to be modernized and reformed for it to be relevant.
That it's something in that, but not in the way I think that some people think it is. It's not in the way that these very prominent, ex-Muslims kind of make it out to be. That they took this very kind of rational course that led them to realize, right, that Islam was not the way. It's not. I don't think that's what's motivating a lot of folks to kind of doubt. I think what is put differently, it's not that they are articulating it in that way, right? But perhaps their actions speak louder than that articulation. And at the end of the day, yes, if you do not think that Islam kind of fits into your conception of what makes a good life, then yeah, that's going to be a really big problem for you to remain Muslim in that sense, right? So it's something, but not in the kind of high-minded way that some kind of prominent folks talk about it.
So, I mean, the reason we went through that exercise is just for our listeners to appreciate the level of nuance you've given this topic, right? Mashallah, you've done the research, quantitative research and qualitative. And so I'm anxiously awaiting the results from you, to hear them directly from you. Just help us understand the categories based on your research that lead people to the edge. What are the causes of doubt in Muslims that lead people to the edge?
Sure. So I mentioned that we did two studies. And so before the quantitative study, what we did was we reached out to leaders in the community and, put to them this notion of doubt that we started off the conversation with, right? The kind of doubt that really pushes you, kind of all the way to the edge. And ask them to consider the times when they spoke to somebody in that state. And then ask them, okay, what were the circumstances around them coming to you, right? So basically, after going through a set of, I believe it was 32 interviews with a really wide swath of religious leaders, we were able to kind of analyze those interviews and kind of put the various reasons, the various motivations for doubt into three general buckets. So the first category is moral and social concerns. So these are things such as, perhaps you're uneasy with how the teachings about how the role of women in Islam, right? How that has been taught to you, right? You're kind of uneasy with that, right? Or it could be, something along the lines of the actions of certain people, right? Or the hypocrisy of certain people that claim to be representing Islam. Obviously, in a post 9/11 context, that bears large.
So, do you mind if we just drill a little bit into those, just so I
Sure.
can understand them?
Of course.
So you're saying in one bucket that leads people to the edge falls people's understanding of the role of women in Islam, right, or in Muslim life.
Yeah, so that's
what does that mean?
one of the things. Yeah, so that's one of the things that can fall into this general bucket of kind of moral or social concerns, as we put it.
Like, is that the whole kind of message that this is a misogynistic religion, that this is a religion for men, not for women?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Or that the hijab is repressive and things like that, right? So again, it can be one's perception of that teaching, or it can be perhaps one's value set has made it so that women's liberation, however they understand that, is placed above kind of the value set with regards to women in Islam, right? So it's a complicated kind of dance there, but really what it comes down to is that how they understand the role of women in Islam does not align with how they understand what the role of women should be in society.
So in that first bucket also, so there's the role of women. There's also you mentioned the bad actions that some Muslims do in the name of Islam. So
Yes.
I'm assuming terrorism or things of that matter. So people are really turned off by that, and therefore equate that with the religion or the practicing of the religion, and therefore turn away. Is that what it is?
Yeah, I mean, so one thing that we we weren't able to do, again, this is kind of the ocean that I was referencing earlier, is really dig into kind of the mechanism. Like, here's the stimulus, right? You see these terrorist acts. Okay, now how does that act upon you, right? So we weren't able to really map the mechanism per se, but what we were able to do is kind of pinpoint that this
Identify
was,
them. Yeah.
something. Exactly, yeah. So identifying kind of that initial push, right? And yeah, so it could be, terrorist acts, but it could be things of a slightly lesser nature. The way we talk about, perhaps honor killings, or the way we talk about other issues that Muslims do, that perhaps kind of chafe against what we perceive to be proper action.
Okay, so you've got moral and social concerns. That's like stuff like the role of women, the way some Muslims do certain things in the name of Islam. Anything else that we need to cover in that point? Because I'm really keen on seeing the full spectrum.
Sure. So I guess the only other thing that I really want to highlight is this notion of being taught that there is only kind of one way to regard Islam, right? When you make Islam kind of very rigid, a lot of times we imagine that what we're doing is making Islam very strong, but really a lot of times what we're doing is making it, somebody's understanding of Islam very brittle, right? Because, if you don't have a little bit of that flexibility, right, then when those challenges come, it might actually kind of undermine your faith, as opposed to kind of absorb it and strengthen your faith. So that's the only other thing I would kind of highlight in that bucket. But there are two other buckets, as I mentioned. So the second one is, kind of broadly speaking, philosophic and scientific concerns. So this is where some of that high-minded stuff comes in. And I didn't mean to entirely dismiss it earlier, but it's an important component when you're talking about, for example, Muslim students going off to college and university. They're going to be encountering a lot of different understandings of what constitutes morality, what constitutes knowledge, right? And so, this could, be something kind of in the scientific realm. For example, the debate about, evolution, right? How does the scientific understanding of the theory of evolution, how does that kind of fit into the Islamic conception of how life began? So somebody that has a really tough time reconciling that, that might kind of lead to something kind of festering in them. Along those same lines, you may just simply not be able to kind of wrap your head around the problem of evil in the world, right? That's kind of a perennial issue with people of faith, kind of going back millennia, right? How do you kind of understand evil in the world, and kind of reconcile that with how your understanding of God, right? So somebody who's unable to do that, I use this term. I'm gonna continue to use this term because it really does. It's this notion of reconciliation, right? Like, how you have these seemingly competing notions, right? And if you're not able to, make the round peg fit in the square hole, well, then you're going to have some issues. A lot of times, though, that square hole is because you made it square, right? But there is, a proper understanding would make it a bit more rounded, right? So that's something to kind of keep in mind along the way.
So that's the philosophical. So stuff like the existence of God, like the existence of hellfire,
Yes.
and punishment, stuff like Islam's view on evolution, philosophical questions that sometimes, or many a time, are at odds with what some people are taught at university or at school.
Yeah. Or just generally speaking, if your kind of personal sense of what is quote unquote rational
Yeah,
just doesn't jibe with what your understanding of religious practice tells you to do.
fair enough. Okay, so I think we've covered two buckets, and the third one
Yeah.
was what?
So yeah, so the third one is really interesting because the third one is personal trauma, and it could be that kind of experiencing a personal loss of some sort, kind of really challenges your beliefs, just like directly because of that event, but the notion of kind of being unwelcomed in your community can also be a bit traumatic, right? If you feel like an outsider in your own community, right? So trauma can come from a personal direct loss, or it could come from just kind of being socially almost ostracized, or not feeling like you fit into your community, or not feeling like you have a community to kind of fit into. And what's kind of notable about this third bucket is that oftentimes it kind of informs a lot of other issues as well. So it can go along with something from like a philosophical concern, or something of a moral or social concern. Perhaps it either goes along with it, or perhaps what's really going on is that personal trauma, and it's manifesting as one of those other concerns.
So, and also, can I add to that? Is it people who have gone through a traumatic experience and feel like Allah has let them go, and therefore why should I believe in a God that's let me kind of reach this low point?
Yeah, no, it could be, and or it could be, how could this happen? Just really being unable to kind of process that event, right? Through a kind of Islamic lens, right? It kind of shakes you. You start thinking, oh, this is just all random, something along those lines, right? And what's interesting is that, I mean, we've all known people who have gone through that personal direct trauma and actually come out the other side as a stronger Muslim, right? So that really highlights personal trauma, as well as all these other kind of concerns, kind of really highlight how the way that you kind of process these things that come to you in your path, right? That really is a function of your kind of individual personality and individual characteristics as well. We're not saying that somebody who experiences trauma is going to have these doubts. It could be that somebody who experiences trauma has their doubt kind of removed, has their heart kind of softened, because that brings them to a closer relationship to Allah. So how that happens, right? So there's various kind of endpoints, right? Once you you can imagine this as kind of a fork in the road, right? For each one of these things that we just mentioned, and sometimes that fork can lead you towards doubt.
Yeah, to a net positive experience as well with Allah. Because there's clearly a lot to digest. There's three buckets, and within those there's a whole heap of stuff that lead people to the edge. You actually highlight some of the top causes of doubts in your research, and you mentioned that it's mainly, or the top four, I think it was, that are part of the moral and social concerns. So it's the stuff like the role of women. Is that correct?
So this is now getting into the quantitative end of things. So after having, kind of better understood the landscape of doubt through that initial qualitative survey when we talked to the leaders in the community. Yeah, exactly. The imams, the chaplains. Then we were able to, take a survey to, the mass public, the American Muslim community, and we were able then to kind of formulate a survey that reflected the learnings that we got out of that initial qualitative study. And so we asked those who have ever experienced doubt, to what degree certain things, right, certain events, certain behaviors, certain beliefs were a contributing factor in their doubt. And as you mentioned, the top of that list was very much, kind of populated by those moral and social concerns. So the top one was the way that some insist there is only one right way to practice faith, the bad things that people do in the name of religion, the intolerance that some religious people show towards other faiths, and the non-religious behavior of supposedly religious individuals. And so in each one of these, right, we see how, it is how an individual is experiencing Islam in the social world, and not so much their kind of unfiltered understanding of Islam, right? It's their actual experiences with individuals, with their community, with the way that the media portrays Muslims that ends up really affecting them.
SubhanAllah, there's a saying by the late Muhammad al-Ghazali, the Sheikh from Egypt, who said words to the effect of like half of the reasons that lead to disbelief is the bad actions of Muslims that portray Islam in a negative light, effectively. So I can see how our actions or our misinterpretations of the faith lead people to the edge. So look, given your research, there's a lot to digest for imams, for chaplains. If you were to go back to them and say, look, this is the result of your research, now do something about it. Like, how are they even supposed to, digest this list of doubts, and how are they supposed to respond to these doubts?
Yeah, so I guess a few communities, I feel very fortunate, have kind of reached out to me after these studies have been published, and asked me, kind of something along those lines, right? Or have sat down and kind of gone through the report in a kind of halakha setting, and I think really what it comes down to is first acknowledging, right, that this kind of exists. I think there is this kind of tendency perhaps to believe that this is a very kind of minute population, and yes, in the very grand scheme of things, perhaps, but that's not to say that that we should just simply ignore, right, these circumstances. And what is more, by addressing some of these concerns, right, perhaps we will not only kind of alleviate the concerns of those already on the cusp, but kind of block the pathway for those who may have been kind of going down that road, right? And so part and parcel of that is to recognize that you as a community, you are providing, you are the main conduit for the way that an individual kind of understands Islam, and so you have to really kind of present Islam in a way that allows that individual to best apply those learnings to their lives right now, right? I mean, why is it that, especially in this pandemic, everybody's all interested in self-help? People are like buying these books off the shelves, right? They're clearing libraries of all these self-help books. I mean, what is Islam if not, telling you how to help yourself lead a better life, right? And so if you can't, present Islam in a way that allows people to understand like how they can, truly better their lives, right? Through a proper understanding of Islam, then you need to kind of, reconsider, right? Like how it is that we're presenting this deen of ours. And then aside aside from that, you need to kind of make sure that you're creating an environment where individuals can really come to you, right? If they have doubts, right? I mean, the worst thing you can do is kind of dismiss people's doubts, because that is almost assured, right, to kind of lead them deeper down that pathway. You really, and for to their credit, the vast majority of the imams that we spoke to were very willing to kind of engage, right? It's just a matter of kind of learning how to better engage. And not to be a bit of a homer here, but honestly, like what Yaqeen is doing is equipping, right, giving those imams that toolkit, right, to best deal with these engagements.
Yeah, no, if nothing else, like a problem identified is a problem solved. So
Yeah.
it's important to acknowledge the pathways that lead people to the edge.
Mhm.
Look, honestly, the biggest takeaway from me, for me, is I understand the whole philosophical piece,
Mm.
which is like people questioning the existence of God and hellfire, etc. I get that, and I've heard that a lot. Trauma is new to me, and that leading people to.
Mhm.
But the big takeaway for me was that as an imam or a community leader, a spiritual leader, your actions just in day-to-day
Yes.
life are just as important as your teachings. And people
Yes.
don't delineate between the two. That
Yes.
if you're kind of practicing or just going about your everyday life in a way that is contrary to Islamic teachings, that actually
Mhm.
leads people to doubt their faith, and that stuff I think is probably overshadowed by the philosophical things, but I think is clearly just as important, if not more.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that, let's say, my 9-year-old niece has. Okay.
Mm.
Usually we ask one, but I'm going to
Okay.
ask three in the
Oh
hope that
wow. All right.
in the hope that we can kind
That's a
of
very inquisitive
summarize.
niece you got there.
A lot of questions. A lot of questions. So number one, if my 9-year-old niece came to you and said, "What are the causes of doubt
Mm.
amongst Muslims?" How would you
Mm.
respond to her? She has a couple of follow-up questions too.
Of course she does. A budding social scientist, I'd see your nieces. Um, so I would say, like so many things in this world, that the answer to that is complex. But generally speaking, it is a matter of how Muslims actually act and how those actions reflect on the religion more broadly. Because you can't expect people to do all the work on their own and understand, deeply understand, what Islam is all about, right? We can't all be imams, right? And so we turn to the imams, we turn to those who represent our faith as a representation of the faith. And so when they fall short, those shortcomings, unfortunately, reverberate back onto us. And so it's upon us to, kind of build up the ability to kind of better understand that people are going to make mistakes, and we need to understand that the actions of any one individual are not indicative of the faith at large.
Okay, and what if I have these doubts? So my 9-year-old niece goes to you and says, "Okay, I know the sources of doubt, and I'm starting to have these doubts. What do I do?"
So, so we actually went ahead and, asked, our sample in the quantitative analysis, what have you done when it comes to these doubts? Have you kind of gone towards those who know, or have you gone towards, those who kind of proclaim to know something about Islam in the kind of ex-Muslim circles of the world? And by and large, our sample has says that they go to their imams, right? So there is that door still open to them, which is normatively a positive sign. And so I would say that as with so many things, go to somebody that you trust, whose judgment you feel kind of properly reflects an understanding of the deen, and ask them, genuinely, tell them what's on your mind. If for whatever reason you don't feel completely satisfied, well, that's one person. Try to see if you can go to another person, right? I mean, so we can't simply think that Sheikh Google is going to have all the answers, or Sheikh Fulan is going to have all the answers, right? We have a large enough community now in the United States, and we're able to reach enough different individuals to where make use of all this social media and the positive ends of social media, and email and such, and all these communication technologies. Reach out to those who know. If they are truly who you think they are, they'll be more than happy to respond to you.
Last question from my niece. She says to you, actually, I don't have these doubts. I'm a practicing Muslim, alhamdulillah, and I believe in my religion, and I have certainty in my religion. And nor am I really interested in any of these sources of doubts or your study. Why should I even care?
First of all, I'd say, man, harsh. But hey, listen, I know where you're coming from. None of us want to do any extra work these days. We are all kind of done with all the digital PDFs that we have to read on a daily basis. Fair enough. But what I would say is that you may be missing out on one of the biggest takeaways, which is that even if you are very confident in your understanding, realize that nobody else really gets that you're confident in your understanding. All they see is the way you act out your understanding, right? And so just as we might imagine, our kind of interactions over time with a non-Muslim, perhaps leading them, by the will of Allah, to accept Islam, we also have to keep in mind that our actions over time may actually dissuade people from entering Islam, or persuade people to leave Islam. And so this study, if nothing else, serves as a reminder that we need to continually be living and our Islam, not simply reading it, not simply kind of thinking about it in private.
Fair enough. Dr. Youssef Chouhoud, Jazakallah khair for your time.
Yeah.
Those who haven't read the study or the results of the study, I really recommend you go onto Yaqeen Institute website and read the study. It's honestly essential reading for anyone who's leading a Muslim circle or standing on the minbar. So thank you so much, Dr. Youssef Chouhoud, and hopefully we get to see you again on DoubleTake.
All right, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.